Now, there's one more criteria that we need to consider and look at when trying to determine the year of the rapture, okay? And that is the Shemitah and Jubilee cycles. We get married in a Shemitah or Jubilee year, but you cannot harvest in a Shemitah or Jubilee year. Now, the rapture consists of three parts. You have the resurrection, you have the gathering of the living, and you have a subsequent harvest. Okay? This is going to take place over a 2-year period, but the actual timeline for Jesus is 1 year and 10 days. He will come on Feast of Trumpets on 1 year, and the following year on Day of Atonement, which is 1 year and 10 days later, we know that Jesus will finish his part, and then he will send the angels to gather this last part of the harvest because they cannot fly. They have new flesh bodies, but they cannot fly, so the angels will have to come get them. Okay? We know that God's calendar year is running from around May 1st or 2nd to the end of April the following year. So when you look at this timeline right here, imagine these lines being from January to December, okay? So God's calendar year would run from about May in 1 year to the end of April in the following year. So this blue shaded area right here represents God's calendar year. When we talk about the wedding of the bride and the lamb, we're looking for Shemitah and or Jubilee years. Okay, so we would get married in a Shemitah or Jubilee year, but you cannot harvest in a Shemitah or Jubilee year. So when we look at our Jubilee cycles, and if you go back and watch that video that had all the Shemitahs and Jubilees in it, what you're going to find is that this 7-year period right here is going to be running on 2 different Shemitah or Jubilee cycles. Okay, and if you stop and think about it, it has to be that way because this is in fact a 7-year period. So if you're running on 7 years that are all on the same Shemitah or Jubilee cycle, you run into a problem over here at the end where you have another Shemitah or Jubilee cycle right here where Jesus will not be able to come and gather the people. But if we're running on 2 or even 3 or 4 different Jubilee cycles, it won't matter that this is a Shemitah year for this particular cycle at the beginning because this will be on a different cycle than the one here. Okay? So just like all the other criteria we've looked at so far, we can actually take this one and relax it a little bit and see it 2 different ways. Okay? We can look at this and say, this is a full-blown harvest. And we can look at this one and say, this is a full-blown harvest. But if we relax this criterion just a little bit, we're going to see different results in terms of the years. All right? This harvest right here, one could argue that this is for children only, and that the adult Jews are going to be fleeing to the wilderness, that no adult Jews will be taken right here, except for the 144,000 who are taken right here. Okay? If that's the case, and there's nothing but children that are being taken while the adult Jews are fleeing to the wilderness, then one could argue this is not a true harvest. If you recall the pictures that I drew in earlier studies, and I showed you how the seed sprouted out of the ground and became a little baby plant, and then it grew and it became a youth plant, and then it became a flower, but it wasn't yet harvested, and then you had the 3 harvests, the first fruits, the main harvest, and the gleanings of those flowers, right? Well, if you look at the first 4 stages of that flower's growth, one could argue that's not a true harvest. Therefore, we could argue that this taking of the children right here is not a true harvest. Therefore, this year could also be a Shemitah and or Jubilee cycle, and it wouldn't matter. So if we had like a Shemitah in this year and a Jubilee in this year, it would not matter because this is not considered technically considered a harvest. Okay? Or we can look at this and say, yes, this is absolutely a harvest. Some of the adult Jews will be taken while the others will flee, and therefore this cannot be a Shemitah or Jubilee year. So we'll look at both. Okay, I went back and wrote these down for y'all real quick. We had 5 different timelines we were looking at: the fall of Adam, the creation, the Israel becoming a nation, Israel when they got Jerusalem, and the American or Gentile timelines. Okay? And I wrote down the Shemitahs and Jubilees so you could see them right here. Y'all can come back and look at these or study these later. But what I want to show you is if, and this is an if, we take all the criteria that we've looked at up until this point, including this criterion right here, and we take everything at face value, and we say that everything must fall into place exactly the way that the criteria suggests, okay, then we can only come to one conclusion. 2025 to 2032 is the only timeline that will fit into all the criteria we've discussed in parts 1, 2, and this one. And we take them at face value, and we take them exactly as they're supposed to be. 2025 is the only year that will work. So just a quick review. If we keep everything at face value and we say that the moon phase has to be in the first or second week, possibly the third week, but not the fourth week, and possibly not the third week. If we say that the Jewish Hanukkah must be on or near Christmas time, that the year of the resurrection must be the end of the timeline either for us or the Jews. If we have to complete the 2,000 years in conjunction with Psalm 90:10, and we use the year 1948 as the year Israel became a nation, and we look at the Shemitah and Jubilee cycles in terms of pre-trib and mid-trib when the 2 harvests are gathered, there's only one cycle that fits those, and that's 2025 to 2032, using the the Jerusalem timeline and the fall of Adam timeline combined. And I'm sure that there's 2 others for the other 2 groups that are gathered, but I'm not looking into those. I'm only looking at these right now, okay? If we relax some of these criteria and we say that the Jewish Hanukkah does not have to be at Christmas, that Jesus said he would raise us up in the 3rd day. And y'all, there's nothing in the Bible that says it has to be at Christmas. That's just something that we are considering based on the wording of the ascension of the 2 witnesses, okay? And of course, Revelation chapter 4 as well, because John mentions those who are gathered alive as being the menorah or the candlestick, okay? Jesus said he would raise us up in the 3rd day, so that prophecy implies that it's possible we could go a little bit beyond the 2,000 years if that's what God wants to do. And of course, the blood moon tetrad of 1949 and 1950 stretches this 1948 out a little bit longer, okay? If we say there's no harvest at mid-trib, like I just discussed, and if we say that the Jews getting married at mid-trib is a second marriage, which it is because God divorced the Jews. So if it's a second marriage and they're getting remarried, then do we need a Shemitah or Jubilee year? Since they're getting remarried, we may not need another Shemitah or Jubilee year for that marriage, okay? If we relax those criteria, we can find at least 2 other options. 2028 with the fall of Adam timeline and the creation timeline, and then 2 other timelines for the other 2 groups. Or we could possibly look at 2030 with the American or the Gentile timeline, where the mid-trib of this timeline does not have to be a Shemitah or Jubilee at all, okay? So just a brief reminder what the 1 year and 10 days is going to look like, because these are the days of Noah, right? So, like I said earlier, Jesus will show up at Feast of Trumpets, but then he will be, quote unquote, gone by the Day of Atonement of the following year. In other words, he will be done gathering 1 year and 10 days later. So from Feast of Trumpets of this year to Day of Atonement the following year will be his 1 year and 10 days. That's his days of Noah. Because remember, his timeline is in blue, ours is in pink. All right? Our timeline is running from Hanukkah to Hanukkah based on the symbolism of all the feast days and the fact that this is a pseudo tabernacles. Jesus will fulfill the real tabernacles, okay? It appears, based on my studies, what God has taught me, that our 1 year and 10 days is going to run from about December 21st, it should be down here, of this year, to December 31st of the following year. So that's 1 year and 10 days, okay? So if the Jewish Hanukkah is in fact around Christmas time, our timeline would be running from Hanukkah, the Jewish Hanukkah, to the following year when this final group is taken around Christmas time or the end of the year, and then they ascend 40 days later on God's true Hanukkah at the end of January. So we still get this 1 year and 10 days from when the first group is gathered to the last group is taken, and then they ascend 40 days later at God's true Hanukkah, the end of January. So it's a little tricky because it's still 1 year and 10 days from here to here, but it's longer than 1 year and 10 days from Hanukkah to Hanukkah because this is the Jewish Hanukkah and God's true Hanukkah. Okay? Now, we could make this January 21st to January 31st of the following year, and it would still be 1 year and 10 days. But because he's incorporating Christmas, it makes it a little different. And here's just a quick, brief summary of what I've been telling you guys all along. You can go back and study this later. That this would be a 2 year process for the rapture. That the year before, or the year of the rapture, that we would start to feel it around Passover. And y'all, these are January to December and January to December. So we would start to feel it around Passover. We would know it at trumpets. And right around the Feast of Trumpets, I don't know if it's the Jewish trumpets on their calendar or God's trumpets on his calendar, they would have the peace treaty. And in my vision, I saw something happening with Israel up here early in the summer, and then they spent all summer working on a peace treaty, and then by the end of the summer around Feast of Trumpets is when they were signing the peace treaty, and then that's when the trumpet would sound. The resurrection will happen here at the trumpets. We will all be changed, but the living will not be gathered until this Christmas time right here at this Jewish Hanukkah, okay? Which is another reason I believe the Jewish Hanukkah must be on or near Christmas time. All right? Then we have the wedding of the bride, the Gentile bride, and the groom. And then during these 4 months right here is when we have the first Magog war. I've told you guys there are 3 Magog wars. The first Magog war comes in 3 different phases. I've told y'all about that in my other videos. Then after those 4 months, we would gather the harvest, and each group would ascend after 40 days. Your elders, and then you have your bishops, and then your disciples down here. Okay? And here's another way y'all can look at this. Y'all can go back and study this on your own time. Again, it's a 2-year time frame from January to December and January to December. How in the world is the Antichrist going to explain these missing children? I have speculated on this in the past, actually for the past several years, and I was close. I was very, very close on the possibility, but there's one catch to it that God has now revealed to me. And there's a reason why God didn't reveal this until the very last minute. He didn't reveal it until now because we had to understand the exact timing of the nuclear war in order to understand how and why Satan is going to explain these missing children through the Antichrist. Let me show you what I mean by that. So in order for me to explain this, I got to give you a brief reminder, okay? We have 2 calendar years from January to December. I told you the rapture process was not going to happen the way people think it is, and I told you that it was going to be a parallel to Moses, okay? Just a quick reminder, Moses in blue met God at the burning bush when? At Hanukkah, okay? So you have the Jewish Hanukkah in December, God's true Hanukkah in January. Then you have Moses going to Egypt at Passover. He pulled the Israelites out of Egypt. He went up a mountain 3 times and he came down the last time with a glowing face at Tabernacles. Now watch how this parallels the rapture process. On Feast of Trumpets, at the last trump, the dead will rise and we will all be changed. That's the resurrection and transfiguration. Then around Hanukkah time, we will have the gathering and we will have the wedding. And we will begin the first day of consummation of that wedding. Because the 7 years parallel the 7 days of consummation, and there's the wedding supper of the Lamb at the end when we return. Okay? So we are also going to receive training during these 75 days from Tabernacles unto God's true Hanukkah. All right? Now, the first 4 months of the following year at God's true Hanukkah is when the Magog War will begin. And it could actually begin back here at Christmas time on the Jewish Hanukkah. It just depends on what you define as the beginning of the war. I showed you how Ezekiel 38 showed us and gave us the timing of the beginning of the Magog War. Okay? So we're going to have the Magog War from Ezekiel 38. That's the first war. All right? The first Magog War. And then we have limited nuclear strikes between Russia and America that are happening during these 4 months. So we're going to be going out and we're going to be gathering these souls who come into the kingdom during these nuclear strikes and during these wars, okay? Then Jesus will harvest the earth and take the children of unbelievers. We have a 2-part first fruits, first Passover, second Passover. We have a main harvest, and then we have a gleaning throughout the year, okay? So it's a parallel to Moses. Now, the reason why I reminded you of this is because we had to know this timing right here. We have to know the timing of these wars to explain how Satan's going to explain the missing children. We also have to know that the Antichrist, who's going to be possessed by Satan, is going to come right here at the first seal on second Passover. And here again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch the Rapture Timeline videos on my other channel. Okay, I have told you guys about the dreams and visions I've had about the nuclear wars. You can see those on my channel, on this channel right here, okay? I've also told you about the vision I had where God showed me something happening with Israel. They worked on a peace treaty all summer long, and then at the end of the summer, they announced that they had a peace treaty and the rapture happened in whatever year the rapture is going to happen, okay? You can also watch those videos on this channel. Now, think about what I just showed you, the 2 calendar years from January to December, the parallel to Moses. Let's say, hypothetically, that the Israeli strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities was the thing I saw happening with Israel. And that they've spent the summer working on a peace treaty. And let's say that come this fall, when they meet in September, around the 23rd, 24th, that they do come up with a peace treaty. Okay? Now, follow along as I show you how the Antichrist is going to explain these missing children. This peace treaty is going to happen at some point in time. But shortly after the peace treaty, we're going to have these 2 major wars. We're going to have limited nuclear strikes in Russia, Ukraine, America, and maybe one other place. And then we're going to have the first Magog war attack on Israel, found in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Here's what's going to happen. Shortly thereafter, the seal is going to break. The Antichrist is going to come on the scene. Now, this is a man who's possessed by Satan, but he has to win everybody's trust, or nobody is going to deal with this man. So here's what he's going to say in order to make people think that he's the new Messiah figure. He's going to come on the scene at the first seal, and he's going to tell the world that because they couldn't keep the peace treaty, and because they just had these major wars, he himself decided to remove all the children from the earth to protect them, and that he removed all the children to keep society from dying out, and he removed all the children for everybody's good, and he's going to claim they're being held in these alien spaceships. Now here's what he's going to tell everybody. Here's the key. He's going to tell everybody that if the world agrees to keep the peace with no more wars for the next 7 years, and he's going to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week and say, look, if you can keep the peace for the remainder of these 7 years, I am going to return your children to you. This is the great delusion. He will go on to explain to the world that he's going to remove more children, and the older ones, if they want to leave, that's the key too, for the good of mankind. You remember that movie, The Knowing, with Nicolas Cage, where they removed the children because the earth was going to be destroyed? Well, and the aliens did it to save society. Well, that's basically the same principle here with a slight twist, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But catch this. He's going to come on the scene and tell everybody, I'm going to finish removing these children for your own good. You have no choice in the matter. It's going to happen. I am here to save humanity. So the world is going to agree to let this Antichrist be their Messiah leader, okay? Once he comes into power, he's going to start telling people that God is not judging the earth, that what they're going through is actually the fallout from the nuclear war they had, and that they did this to themselves and they need to stop. So what's going to happen is the Muslims are going to be so shocked from what happened in Ezekiel 38, they're going to be quiet for a while. They're going to sit down and be quiet. They're going to play along for a while. The Jews are going to get their temple. The religions of the world are going to come together and unite, and they're going to agree. We need to unite. We need to be one. We all need to be living in unity. They're going to ask the Antichrist to possibly institute these Noahide laws for everybody so that they can get their act together. And there will be some sense of morality in the world, okay? So people are going to be running around thinking they don't need Jesus. They just need to unite. This is not the end times. This is just the Messiah figure coming down to intervene in mankind's history. So everything's going to go semi according to plan for the first 3.5 years. People are going to fall for this. Okay, they're going to see the alien spaceships. They're going to feel a sense of unity and harmony. They're going to think it's love, but it's not. Okay, and they're going to come together and they're going to unite. And everything's going to go great for the first 3.5 years, somewhat. But then at mid-trib, right here, this is when all hell is going to break loose. So after this first harvesting of children, where the Antichrist, possessed by Satan, tells the world that he took the kids for their own good, okay? And after 3.5 years of people staying away from wars, not wanting anything to do with wars, and after Satan telling everybody that he got rid of these nutcase Christians, the ones who were very misguided, the ones who were mentally unstable, the ones who were talking about the end times all the time, the ones who were pushing for these wars because they wanted to see the Battle of Armageddon, because their misinterpretation of Scripture thought that it was going to bring in a glorious time for them. He's going to tell the world he got rid of those nutcases, right? So he's removed the children for their own good, but here's the problem. If there's no wars for the first 3.5 years and people are allowed to start reproducing again, there's going to be children on the earth again. But what's going to happen is people are going to think, okay, he only removed the children until we could calm down the first time, but he's allowed us to have children these last 3.5 years. He's a good man, right? But what's going to happen is Jesus will return at mid-trib and he will harvest the earth again. It's going to expose Satan. There's no way in the world Satan's going to be able to explain this second harvest of children when the people have behaved themselves for the first 3.5 years and they've been allowed to reproduce again. Then why is this man taking their kids from them? They're going to know, the people of the world are going to know at this point, this man is a liar. This man is evil. Our children are not coming back. They're going to realize that he's exposed. They're going to see it for what it is. And Satan knows that the world's going to see this exactly for what it is. Okay? So what Satan has to do is he has to switch up on people. Just like a typical narcissist. They come in, they pretend to love you, they love bomb you, they're charming, they're funny, they seem so kind and whatnot just to get you hooked, and then the mask falls off. Well, that's what happens right here at mid-trib with this second harvest. God is going to expose Satan's lie. Everybody on the earth is going to know this man's lying. So what Satan has to do, he has to come in full force. He has to come in and issue the mark of the beast, and he has to change up on these people, and he has to say, okay, now that my mask is off, here's what I'm going to do. You will worship me, you will sell your soul to me, or you will die. This is when he goes into the temple and claims to be God. At this point, he will have convinced the Muslims that he is their Mahdi or their Messiah figure or whatever they're looking for, but we know him as the beast, right? So he's going to go to the Muslims and he's going to say, fellas, it's all yours. I am your Mahdi. Anybody who doesn't worship me, I want off with their heads. And you have my permission to go kill anybody and everybody. You have permission to hunt them down by any means necessary. Anybody who's not with me and my system and my kingdom will die. You get no food, you get no drink, water if you can find it, but if you don't take this mark, you get nothing. So he institutes the mark of the beast and switches up on these people. Now, Daniel tells us that he causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. All right, the Jews who were worshiping peaceably in their temple for the first 3.5 years, they now have to stop. They're going to realize this is not their Messiah. They're going to flee from Jerusalem. And the Psalm 83 war is going to take place mid-trib at this point, where the Muslims will be allowed to come in and ransack Jerusalem, tear it all up, burn it down, whatever they're going to do, take the houses, live in them, and all that stuff like Psalm 83 says. And God is going to allow this to happen because the whole time the Jews have been in the temple sacrificing, they haven't repented. They haven't turned to Jesus. They haven't repented of sin. None of that. Okay? So the Muslims will be allowed to come in and ransack and pillage and rape and all that and kill or behead anybody who refuses to take the mark of the beast. And from this point on, from mid-trib to the end, because he's the ruler of the entire world, he's going to have people coming after him trying to kill him to take over his spot. Okay? And this is what's going to ultimately lead to the Battle of Armageddon when, and here's what I believe. I believe when Jesus returns with us, they're going to believe, the people on earth are going to believe that we are actually the aliens coming to attack them. And they believe the aliens took their children and whatnot. So they're going to turn around and attack us in the second coming, thinking that we're actually the aliens and whatnot. This switch up right here at mid-trib, this is what's going to cause most people to turn back to Jesus and to give their lives as martyrs. So there you have it, guys. This is how the Antichrist is going to explain away the missing children.